Okay, I'm recording you, and I think today we should talk about Halloween. There's one particular story I want you to tell about Halloween.
Did you want me to tell a story about the skunk?
Yeah.
Oh, brother.
Come on, it's a great Halloween story.
I can't remember what year it was, but it's before I ever went to the Army because I drove a 1938 Ford.
So what were you, about 18?
I probably was 17 or 18. I'm not sure.
So probably 1950.
Yeah, probably not. Around 1950. And the focal point of our community was Ramsey Reformed Church. That's where all the young people got together every Wednesday night. And we had a kind of a religious meeting, and then we'd decide what kind of trouble we'd get into after the meeting was over. So a couple of the boys this was before Halloween, and a couple of the boys had driven to Titonka, to the local town, and on the way to Titonka they hit this huge skunk on the road. It was a gigantic skunk, and actually they stopped the car, got out and looked at it, and they thought, wow, what could we do with this skunk? So they told, after the meeting on Wednesday night, a bunch of us guys were all together in a kind of a huddle, and they said, well, we could pull some kind of a trick on Halloween with this skunk, it would be great. So there was Bert Camp, Jimmy Minders, Lawrence Heyer, myself. I don't remember if there was any other Minders boys. There might have been a couple other kids too, I'm not sure. So they decided that we had one red stoplight in Titonka, in town, in Main Street. It was right at an intersection. And the town constable always sat on a bench in the Farmers Cooperative gas station by this intersection, and his name was Bill Stott, and he always wore striped big old bib overalls, and he always carried a 5-cell flashlight with him, and I guess he carried a 38 snub-nosed Smith & Wesson too. But anyhow, we decided that somehow or another we should hang this 15-pound skunk from this red stoplight in the middle of town. It would be quite an attraction.
Of course.
So we sat down and did the planning, and Bert Roskamp said what we have to do is get a long pole about 20 feet long and put this skunk on the end of this pole with a wire hook so they could run from the car, and it would have to be held on the outside of my 38 Ford. I don't know why they decided my 38 Ford was the one to run with. So they hung it on the outside of my 38 Ford. One guy sat in the front, one in the back, and they each had an arm out the window holding a pole with a skunk on the end of it. That was part of the plan. And then somebody says, well, what if Bill Stott on Halloween night has people employed to catch guys that are pulling pranks like us? And they said, yeah, there's a guy by the name of, he's hiring a guy by the name of Ralph Harms who has a brand new Pontiac, and it's fast. And Bill Stott's hiring him to sit at the intersection there and watch for guys like me, or guys like us that are going to pull pranks. So they said, well, how can we stop Ralph from catching us? Because my 38 Ford wouldn't be as fast as his Pontiac. So they said, well, we better go do a trial run and go into town and drive out of town and see what roads we're going to take for an escape route. They said, we got to plan all of this too. We got things down pretty detailed. And so we decided to escape route around the curve outside of town, and then there was what they call an old dog path road. It's just two trails out through the field, but it's a real road. We'd cut down this road, and Jimmy Minders said, well, the thing of it is, this guy can probably catch us with that Pontiac. Well, we got to do something to stop him. So they decided we'd get this big roll of wire and pull it behind my car with all this skunk paraphernalia and everything. We'd drag it behind the car, and we'd have a trip rope on it. So they rigged all of this up. So as we were sitting outside of town, we put all this paraphernalia together, and then Bert Roskamp said, you know what? They might get your license plate number. He says, I brought some black tape. We'll make 7s out of the 1s, and we'll make 8s out of the 6s, and we'll change your whole license plates number to not. We'll doctor up the numbers so you can't, so they'll look different than they are. And I said, okay. So I'm the driver, and so we head into town on Halloween, and we're sitting outside of town discussing when we should start doing this. It wasn't quite dark enough yet. And somebody ran to town to look to see where Bill Stott was and where Ralph Harms was, and sure enough, they were sitting right on the corner where we wanted to hang the skunk. They were sitting on that bench. And of course, Ralph wasn't in his car. It was just sitting there on the side, and they were watching for guys like us. So we waited till dark, and then Bert Roskamp said, it's time to go. Let's let her roll. So we went speeding into town. I under the stoplight, slammed on the brakes. Jimmy Minders and Bert jumped out, hung the skunk up, and dropped the pole and back in the car. And we took off, and Bill Stott was firing his .38 Smith & Wesson. I think maybe he was firing it up in the air, I don't know. And Ralph Harms took after us, and we had my .38 Ford, and we had that thing on the floor, and this guy, he was right on our tail, blasting his horn. And he saw the roll of wire, but I don't think he knew what it was all about. And we cut down a dead road, and Bert hollered, "Trip the wire!" And he tripped the wire, and Ralph ran his Pontiac right on top of this roll of wire, and it all wound up in his crankshaft. So we stopped him, and we drove out of town and took everybody home, and we was quiet as a church mouse. We didn't say a word. And until the next day, my dad had to go to town and go to the grain elevator for something or other, and everybody was standing around looking at this huge skunk that was hanging up in the red light and laughing and talking about it. And the town constable was upset, and he called the sheriff. The sheriff's name was Lindhorst. And so I get on the old Alice Chalmers tractor and go out in the field and plow with a big old sheepskin coat on and stuff pulled up over my ears. And I looked, and at the end of the row, when I was coming with the plow, I see Bill Stott and Sheriff Lindhorst and Ralph Harms all standing at the end of the cornfield where I was plowing, wanting to talk to me. So I thinking to myself, boy, can I act innocent or what? You know, I can't give this away because they'll probably stick me in jail or arrest me and whatever. And so I drove right up to the end and pulled the plow out of the gear and swung around and headed back into the furrow, and I put the clutch on and stopped and never got off the tractor. I just turned in the seat and looked at them and said, you guys looking for somebody? Yeah, they said, we're looking for a guy that hung a skunk up on red light in Titonka, and we're going to arrest him. Oh, I said, did you see who did it? And they said, well, everybody says it was your car and it was you that did it. I said, well, did you get the license plate number? Yeah, we got the license number, but it doesn't fit your license plate number. And I said, oh, did you check? And he said, yes, we went up to the house and talked to your mother. And so they came back and they said, was it you that hung that skunk up there in the main street? And I said, what skunk are you talking about? You know, I just kept saying stuff like that. What skunk are you talking about? I said, I didn't see any skunk. And they kept asking me, and I says, well, my dad sent me out here to plow this morning, so I got to get going. So I just put the tractor in gear and dropped the plow on the ground, and I took off. And they didn't chase me or anything. They turned around and went back, got in their car, and left. And then my dad came home from town, and he went in the house, and he's laughing. And he says to my mother, the funniest thing I ever saw in my life, in Halloween, some of the guys hung a huge skunk on Main Street in town. It's hanging right where everybody can see it, and it stinks to high heaven. And everybody's standing around laughing about how they pulled that off right under the town constable's nose. And my mother said, boy, that's strange. The sheriff was just here, and the town constable was just here talking to Tony, like as if he knew something about it. And she said, then finally they left, and he went on plowing, you know.
Yep.
So the whole thing was quite a laughing stock, and us guys had this secret for the longest time. And everybody probably knew it was me, but I always denied it. And then the next Halloween, there was a bunch of other boys that thought they'd pull the same stunt, and they all got caught. And he stuck them in jail. Our jail was under the water tower in town, and they put them in jail. And they fined them for it and whatever. And they blamed them for putting it on the year before, and they swore up and down they weren't the ones that did it before. They were just copycats.
Did you ever tell your dad?
Oh yeah, I told my dad about it later, and he said, boy, he said, you told them a lie, didn't you? And I said, no, I never. I always says, what skunk are you talking about? I said, I never asked him. I told him I didn't hang it up there. And even to this day, I went home from my brother's funeral when he died a month or so ago, and I'm 86 years old, and some old guy came up to me and he says, you been hanging any skunks up on red lights lately? I guess that's the end of my story.
All right, well, that's a good one.